on this computer. All right, welcome everybody to the February DAS meeting. First, do we have any new members? Anybody new?
Yes.
Want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Roger Drew. This is my first meeting. I just joined in January.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Welcome, Roger.
Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome to the club.
Yep. Let us know if you have questions. On Tuesday nights, we have more informal meetings where you can find out a lot more info.
Okay.
And we can help you with whatever you're getting started with, whatever questions you might have. Can't do that too well during this meeting, but we can definitely help you on Tuesdays.
Okay.
All right, and that leads us into our next topic on the agenda. We've been remote for the last 2 months or so, ever since December, when the COVID numbers spiked up real high. And so it looks like it's coming down quite nicely back to where it was before that happened. So we'll go back to having hybrid meetings again as of next Tuesday. So next astronomy workshop will be in person and remote, depending on which flavor you prefer. But yeah, you can attend in person or you can send remotely. There's no problem with that. So the next item on the agenda, Sydney, you want to talk about the election real quick?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'll just make a quick announcement on the election. As you all know, the terms are up for the president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. And if you are a member of good standing and you'd like to nominate yourself or somebody else, just send an email to my email, sidastronomy@yahoo.com, and put in about a 200 or 500 word write-up on yourself if you feel like you want to nominate somebody. And yeah, that's about it. Rob, thanks.
Okay, great. And I would like to encourage, anybody who is interested, you can be on the board, you can be involved in our decisions, you can be involved in voting, and you can help out in interesting ways, like being the treasurer, being the secretary or president or vice president. It's very interesting stuff. And if you want to get more involved, we welcome you to our board meetings. You can come, even if you don't want an official role, you can always attend our board meetings. We had a bunch of people who were in the room with us a little bit ago when we were in our board meeting, and we welcome you to help out. So next item on the agenda is the AP-SIG. Bill, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So the next AP-SIG meeting will be on Saturday, March 12th, 7 p.m. Don't have a topic yet, but that's the date and time. That's it.
Okay. And during this meeting, you guys will see quite a lot about astrophotography. So if it whets your appetite, be sure to come on out to the AP-SIG and find out more. So next item on the agenda is the book club. Mary, you want to say something? Mary, you there? Robert Stack, did you want to say something?
Are they muted or are they just gone?
Not sure.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, there she is. Good. Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm using Robert's computer.
No problem.
Our next book club meeting is on Thursday, February the 24th. We start at 7 p.m. via Zoom, and we are reading How the Hippies Saved Physics, Science, Counterculture, and the Quantum Revival by a professor from MIT, David Kaiser, and David will be joining us. So we're really looking forward to it. And Beth Treblecock is going to be leading the meeting. I don't know if Beth is with us tonight. And the following month in March, we're reading What Stars Are Made Of, The Life of Cecilia Payne-Kapuskin by Donovan Moore. Donovan will be joining us and giving a brief lecture, and also the granddaughter of Cecilia Payne-Kapuskin, who's a professor at Dartmouth, will be joining us. So that should be a really exciting meeting. The books are readily available in digital format. We circulated a free digital version of the How Hippies Saved Physics, a link at archive.org. So We look forward to having everyone join us. Even if you haven't read the book, feel free to drop in. And anyone you know who may be interested guests are always welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. So next item on the agenda is Bob Menser. Greg, you want to speak about that? Greg, you're muted, I think.
He's muted.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, the announcement about Bob's passing went out over the DAS group last week. The funeral is now set for this Saturday at, let me get, now I lost my, at the Emmanuel Orthodox Presbyterian Church, 1006 Wilson Road in Wilmington. 10:30 in the morning is the visitation, 11 o'clock is the memorial itself. The details again are on the DAS website, so that, and the obituary is in the News Journal, both places. So Saturday, if anyone can come and pay their respects and share some reminiscences.
Yeah, we were very sad to hear about that. Bob Menser was a good
Yes.
friend to all of us, and so we were very sad to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a physics teacher at William Penn High School, and
Yeah.
when my older son was there, I always threatened to sick my son on him. Unfortunately, that never came to pass. I'd love to have had him teach my son. He was just a wonderful person and brilliant and funny and one of the driest senses of humor you'll ever find. Great guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the stories he had mentioned about his students, speaking of his sense of humor, is there was some scheduling or something, or test or something that they were talking about. And one of the students complained and said, "Oh, that's not fair." And his response was, "Don't talk to me about fair. I have to pay full price for a haircut." And if you know, remember Bob's half a head of hair. So, but he was the kind of teacher that you remember from your education, of that
Yeah.
one teacher that really connected with students. And,
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so he
Remember
was a
how just
good
sorry.
teacher for us at DAS. So
Yes.
many programs that he did.
And they were all just fascinating and unusual too. They weren't like your average presentation by any means.
The most memorable one, I think, is when he dressed up as William Halley in the
Yes.
academic robes and the
Yep.
wig. And then he gave a program in the persona of William
Edmund Halley.
Halley, and we could ask questions of the famous man himself. And,
Yep.
Very cool. Yep, he was
Great
a
guy.
member for many, many, many years. He was actually treasurer for about 20 years, which is one of the longest stretches anyone was on the board in one position. That's pretty impressive, to say the least. None of us can come close to that.
Yeah, for
At least
sure.
today. Yeah, it's crazy. But he also was frequently at Mount Cuba, like every Tuesday night. He was out there doing stuff, getting involved, helping out. He was a very good guy.
Yeah.
Telling jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And stories, lots
Yeah.
of stories.
Yeah, he was a great storyteller.
Yeah.
Okay, we should move along.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem, no problem.
Don't.
Organic, no problem. So I don't believe I have anything else on my agenda. So Jeff, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. So this month's meeting is the DAS Astrophotography Showcase. A lot of you have seen some really amazing astrophotos by DAS members in the focus. And this will provide an opportunity for a more interactive discussion, about how the photos were acquired and the rigs that may have been used, et cetera, the process a little bit more. But before we jump into the actual astrophotography showcase, we have two sort of talks that will sort of warm us up into that direction. But before we actually jump into that, because we're going to have a whole bunch of people speaking, as Rob mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. The intention is that this will end up on our YouTube channel. Normally I ask the speaker if they object, but because we have so many different speakers and I don't want to have to keep interrupting, what I will say is the default will be that by you giving your talk, you are allowing us to post it on YouTube. If you do not want that, please either let us know before you start giving your talk, or if you'd feel more comfortable, you can email me or Rob offline. And what we could do is we can just edit your section out of the video before it's posted. Again, but just please a reminder at this point, if you are not comfortable having your portion included on the YouTube channel, please let me know. Otherwise it will be included. So again, just want to preface been saying thanks to everyone for contributing today. Usual protocol, just so the audio quality is clear, we'll go ahead and mute everybody. And basically, because this is all DAS members talking, I assume we can keep it informal. Normally we've had people ask questions via the chat, but I assume in this case we can maybe go a little bit more informal and just have people break in and ask questions as we go along. If we find that that turns out to be too disruptive, we'll take a different path, but I think it'll be fine. So at this point, Rob, if you would like to mute everybody, we'll take it from there.
All right, everybody should now be muted, and anyone who else comes in will be muted as well.
All right. So to actually warm us up into this topic of astrophotography, Rob Lancaster is actually going to give a brief presentation about some beginner astrophotography gear that was recently purchased, not only to be used at the Salwin and Mount Cuba, but some gear that you can actually borrow and take home. So if something intrigues you about what you hear tonight, we are slowly sneaking up on the ability to enable club members to dabble in astrophotography a bit. Rob, all yours.
All right, great. So what I'm going to be presenting on today is some beginner astrophotography gear that we recently acquired that we're hoping to make into loaner cameras, just like we have loaner telescopes. So last fall, Chris Horrocks had this idea and he came to me about it. And it was at a Tuesday night astronomy workshop, just like any of you can come to. And we started discussing it a little bit, and I really liked the idea. So again, the idea is that we would have cameras and astrophotography accessories that are in little portable boxes, all set up for you with instructions and guides and all that stuff. And you could borrow the whole kit and use it and then bring it back when you're done, just like we do with our telescopes. And the idea is we could use that with the club telescopes, or you could use it at home with your own personal telescopes. And again, we're planning to put it in little boxes. Some of them have their own boxes already. A couple things we had to purchase a box for, kind of like this one right here. I really like the idea. I put together a proposal. I first presented it back in November of last year. And you can see that proposal on the right. Then we discussed it a little bit at that meeting. There were a couple ideas sent back and forth over the email. I made a couple revisions to it and it was approved in December. Then after it was approved, I went and started making the purchases in January, received most of them in January. And then in February, I started testing gear and making sure things worked and figuring things out. I'm hoping that all the gear should be ready for loan in March of 2022. I need a couple more weeks just to make sure everything's good, but we're really almost there now, as we will discuss. The first item that will be available for loan is the ZWO ASI 120 monochrome camera. That is a USB 3 camera, so it's very high speed. It can do hundreds of frames per second. It is monochrome, so it'll get black and white pictures. The resolution is listed as well as the pixel size. And its quantum efficiency is 80%, which is extremely high. It is a really, really sensitive camera, more sensitive than most other cameras out there. So you can start seeing galaxies and nebulas within seconds of starting to take the picture. And you can get images of planets and the moon with mere fractions of a second so that you can counteract the effects of seeing, which is really powerful. But again, note that this is a monochrome camera, not a color camera. We'll get to the color one in a minute. This camera has several purposes that it could be used for. It is a very good guide camera. That's mainly how I use mine. So I actually own this camera, the same camera, and I use it as a guide camera primarily. But I also found when I started doing some solar imaging that it worked extremely well for solar imaging, and it worked better than my Canon camera, better than my astrophotography camera, and better than the color one that I'll show you in a minute. So if you're going to do solar imaging, this is really the one to use. Also, you can do all sky movies because it comes with a little fisheye lens. It's a C-mount lens. You can see the whole sky. So you could do all sky movies or images, which is really cool. And also because this is a camera that does not have like color filters in front of it, it's not a color camera, you can put things like O3 filters, H-alpha filters, or any kind of filter you want to on it and get narrow band images. It does come with several accessories that are listed here. They will be placed in the box together with the camera and it'll all come as one unit. I have tested this camera. I received it recently and was able to test it last week. The night I was testing on was really not a good night for imaging. It was first quarter moon and there were clouds. But in spite of that, I managed to get a couple of pictures of galaxies, as you can see, and it's minimal effort, minimal time. On the left, you can see M82. That is 10 30-second images. So in 30 seconds, I got the galaxy to look like that with this camera. On the right-hand side, we got M81, and that is a stack of 8 60-second images. Again, fairly short, fairly quick, you got your results. Again, they are black and white, but galaxies don't have a whole lot of color to begin with. So it's great for galaxies, I would say. I also took an image of the moon, and I managed to get an image of an airplane when I was taking images of galaxies. So there is an airplane in my photo, which is kind of rare and interesting, especially since it's a fairly narrow field of view. I mean, it's like, what are the chances? I also, as I said, took some color images before of the sun. And when I say color, I took monochrome images and I colorized them to make them look like they were colored. But again, you really want to use this camera for solar imaging with something like the club's Lunt solar telescope. You don't want to use the other cameras simply because the other cameras will very quickly saturate their red pixels. And this camera does a very nice job of imaging it because of course it's monochrome and you can adjust the brightness and it doesn't affect any other pixels because those are the only ones that are exposing. So you're good. A couple more pictures I took more recently of the sun with my 120. It's quite good at that. Now the ASI 224 is a one-shot camera, so one-shot color camera. So with the monochrome camera, you know, it's really great for narrow band images and stuff like that. But if you want to do a color image of a nebula or a galaxy, you probably wouldn't want to use that. Same thing for the planets. Some of the most interesting things on the planets are their colors. So you would really want a color camera for that. This camera has very similar specs to the other camera, but again, it is color. And this camera actually does not block IR light. So it is more sensitive in that realm. So you can put a filter in front of it that blocks visible light and passes IR, and you can get even better images of the planets because IR light tends to have less brightness variations due to the seeing. So you might even be able to get better images with that. And of course, you can still do the color images with no problem. The Other things that you can do with that, you can take images of galaxies, you can take images of nebulas, and you can do the all sky movies as I described before. But of course, these would be color, which is one benefit of this particular camera. I will say this camera we do not have yet, unlike the other one, because it is on back order. But I may be looking into another source because Jeff found one today that may have one in stock. So I might cancel the first order and get that one. So we'll have to see. I do have some images here, some samples that I have done with my 224, because again, I don't have it yet. So I threw in some that I've taken with mine. And since it's the same kind of camera, it should be the same kind of results. Here's a little video I made of some clouds and the Milky Way using the all sky feature. You know, it's a nice fisheye lens on there, and you just take a bunch of images, one after the next, and you turn it into a movie. So you can see the Milky Way, and you can see some clouds coming in. They're actually pretty cool looking. So we usually get really mad when there are clouds in the sky, but if you do a video, they can actually be kind of cool. There's something you can do when it's kind of cloudy out. The next camera that we acquired is a Canon 60D camera body. This camera could be used with Canon lenses, most certainly. So if you have lenses, you could put them on this camera and take photos. There's no problem with that. It is a CMOS sensor, just like the last two. I don't think I mentioned that. It is a CMOS sensor, not a CCD sensor. It's not as sensitive as the last two that we looked at before, but it does take color pictures, and it does not require a computer. You know, the first two, you have to have a laptop set up with the camera plugged into it and the software running. But with this one, you can just click a button, or you can use the intervalometer. So you click a button on the intervalometer and it'll take the pictures. So you don't need a computer for this one. And that would be a good reason to have it. It does do images and it does movies. So you could do the planetary imaging I discussed before with this camera with no problem. You would just record 60 frames per second video or something like that. And then you could process that the same way that you do something from the ZWO that I discussed before. It does have a much bigger sensor than the ZWO cameras do. So if you're looking to take a picture of a large nebula like the Orion Nebula, I would use this camera, not the one that I discussed before. We did get a couple of accessories for this. I got both 1.25 and 2-inch telescope adapters. We got 2 SD cards. One of them it came with, and a 64 gigabyte one we bought in addition to the first one, so you have a spare. It came with 2 batteries. It came with a charger. I purchased an intervalometer that you can use to set up a sequence or time lapse or something like that. And Jeff just purchased a nice carrying case or storage case for it, so it's nicely contained with all of its accessories, so you can take it and use it. This is an image that I took with that camera the other night, the same night I was doing the ZWO images. This is also M81 and M82. You'll notice the color. You see some red here, you see some lighter colors over here, and there's not much else because again, galaxies don't have much color in them, but you can see some color, some hints of color in the stars. And again, all these images I'm showing you were taken on a moonlit night with clouds. So you could get even better results if you did them. And also it's here in Wilmington. So if you go to a darker site, you'll get even better results. Another accessory that we got is the mini guide scope from Orion. It is 50 millimeters. And one of the main plans for this is to put on a scope in the Solon for doing guiding. But I also want it to be available if somebody wants to try guiding on their home telescope. So you could take one of the ZWO cameras that I discussed before, you can put it in the back of this, and you can mount that on your telescope to use as a guider. And it works quite well. I use it all the time as I described. This is the exact guide scope I use for all my imaging. And the 120 is the camera I use for guiding with all my imaging. So it does work quite well. Again, we would probably want to use this on the stellar view, maybe leave it on there for a while and then somebody could borrow it for a while. we'll have to see how that works out, how we decide to do that. And if it does get a ton of use, maybe even someday we could get a second one. But I think we should see how things play out first. It does have several accessories that we will keep in the box with it. The second guiding option is the OffAxis Guider. I personally have never used an OffAxis Guider for astrophotography, but a lot of people swear by it. They think it's great. Now, for me personally, since I've never tried it before, one of the benefits of the club having something like this is that I could borrow this, see if I like it, and then maybe switch someday. But I've never wanted to try it so much that I'd shell out the $100 to just buy one and see if I like it. But if the club has one, I could try it and see if I like it. So that's
Rob, do you want to give the 20-second what is an off-axis guider compared to a guide scope?
No problem. So a guide scope is a separate telescope, much smaller, but a separate telescope mounted to your first telescope that is imaging while you are imaging with your main imager. And that second imager with the guide scope is taking pictures continuously, monitoring a star or a set of stars in the image it acquires to tell the mount to move or not move to make sure it stays on target. With the off-axis guider, that's not a separate scope. It's actually mounted in line with the camera you're using for imaging. So there is a second imager like the ZW120 that you would mount on the top of the off-axis guider. And there's a little prism in the light path that will not actually block the sensor you're using for your main imaging, but it will just pick off a little bit of light, and you can get a star or two that comes in with that little prism, and you can use that to do your guiding. So it doesn't require a second scope in order to make it happen. Still requires a second camera, which again we have, that's the 120, and you just mount it on there along with your main camera that you are using. So again, we have the two options. You can try each of them, decide which one you like. I might be trying this one at some point to see if I like off-axis guiding. Again, I've never tried it, so it might be a nice thing to try. The next thing on the list is a Raspberry Pi 4, which could be used for controlling all of this. So with the package that we acquired and the Raspberry Pi, you can have a full astrophotography suite up and running. So you can run the equipment on the Pi, connect to it from your other laptop, or run it straight off the Pi, and you can connect it to a keyboard and a monitor if you like. But the main way that I use my Pi is I set it up on my scope in the driveway, and I put it on the Wi-Fi or an Ethernet cable, and I bring that inside the house, and I sit on my couch in the living room, controlling my equipment while I'm watching a movie. And so I'm imaging sitting inside while it's in the freezing cold outside. And you will definitely be able to do that with the setup that we have purchased. So that is one option for you. The other thing you could do is use other software on your computer to control these accessories as well. So you have this option and those options. Now, I am actually an amateur software developer working to develop software for the Pi. There are indie drivers that control the equipment. And then there's also K-Stars, the program that runs on the Pi and on your computer, if you like, to control all those pieces of equipment. So you can command your telescope to slew to different parts of the sky. You can plate solve the images that you acquire. You can guide automatically using the software. All of these features will be built in to the devices that we have acquired. So you may use it, and I can help you and guide you through it. And the best news about it is, we have an SD card which stores all the information that this Pi will have on it. So if somebody messes it up, I can just pop in a new SD card. I'll have a backup of everything on the computer. It'll be all ready to go. So we'll pop in that backup and everything will be fine again. And of course, it's a $35 computer, or sorry, $55 computer. So if there's a problem with it, if you break it, we could get another one. It's not that expensive. And we did buy a few accessories. We got a case. We got a couple cables that'll be attached to it. We got a USB hub. You got an AC power cable, so you can power it with the wall outlets. You got an Anderson power pole cable, so if you wanted to power it with the equipment we have in the Solon, you can use the Anderson power poles to power it. Or if you have some kind of device like in the field, like a battery that provides electricity for your telescopes and whatnot, you can use a cigarette plug as well. And again, I've placed all that stuff in this nice little case. And I can also show you, here's what it looks like. So you have the Pi here on top, you have the USB hub here on the bottom, and it has 7 different ports on it. And the little 1-foot cables are being used to connect the 2 things to one another. So the Pi gets its power from the hub, and the hub gets its power from one of these 3 options, as we said. So it powers the full system. And that will be all set up and ready to go with instructions in a couple more weeks. I also want to thank Eric and Jeff, who spent a number of hours with me at Mount Cuba on Friday as we were imaging the Pi, getting it all set up, testing the gear and the equipment, and assessing what kind of boxes we would need to house our gear. And it worked quite well, and I think it's mostly good to go, except, of course, we still need to get that last camera. In the future, we could consider getting some other gear, depending upon how well the gear we have now gets used. So if lots of people get really excited about trying out stuff and seeing if they like this, seeing if they like that, it gets a lot of use, we could get a full laptop with software installed on it that people could borrow. Or we could get a more advanced astrophotography camera with filters if people wanted to try that stuff. We'll see what the demand is and see if we're interested in doing that. But those are plans for the future, perhaps. And that is my whole presentation. Any questions?
Rob, first of all, thank you. It's an excellent presentation. I did have a question. Where the heck did you find the Pi at? They're all on back order.
Oh, that's a really, really great question. So I was running into the same issue, and then it happened to be the case that Jeff had one that was the exact model we wanted, sitting on the shelf in his basement.
Aha, okay.
He purchased his, and actually he gave us a discount over the regular cost, which is awesome.
Thank you, Jeff.
Another thank you to Jeff for helping us.
Unfortunately, it was the only one, Mike, so I don't have any more.
Yeah. It looked like it was a Canon kit. Was that correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
Right. So that the Canon kit 4 gig model is on back order until March 15th, and then the 8 gig, which I just ordered, is back order until April 15th. Yep. So and they're quite a bit more expensive than they used to be because of COVID and everything else. So
yeah.
But yeah, it's great that your club purchased all this. Is really great.
Yeah, and
thanks a lot.
A couple of highlights. I mean, obviously, if anyone would like to borrow a single piece, like Rob said, hey, I've never used an OffAxis Guider, let me try it out. You're welcome to borrow it. The other side, if you kind of, let's say, after the presentation today, you're like, wow, I think it's really interesting. I'd love to try out some astrophotography, but I know nothing about it. As we're now resuming in-person gatherings, come on out on a Tuesday night. Let us know, because as Rob said, depending on if you want to photograph the moon or the sun or a nebula or a galaxy, we might recommend different combinations of equipment or attend one of the AP-SIG meetings. The key thing is, as you see the photos that Bill and other members of the AP-SIG are soon going to be sharing with us, we now have a complete set of equipment that you could use to take photos similar to the ones you're going to be seeing today. Obviously, the only thing that's missing from the suite of hardware that Rob just shared is the actual main telescope. But the DAS has a couple of, actually really 2 candidate telescopes that it could be used with. But if you have a telescope of your own, we could work with you to figure out how to get it all going. So yeah, a lot of good stuff, a lot of flexibility.
Three telescopes actually that we could use it with.
That's true. Yeah. So we have the 12-inch reflector, we have a 5-inch apo refractor, and then we have a solar telescope.
Yep. So we are going to put in your hands the ability to use any of this stuff to be able to image just like you're seeing in the AP-SIG. So we can get you started and you don't have to pay anything except your club dues. You can get it up and running. That's
Great, thank you.
I'm
Thank
going to
you.
make sure that the Pi that I'm setting up is going to be on the networks and everything is good so that you'll be able to set it up like in the Samhain. You'll be able to go in the library and start doing your imaging. I have already used my own personal ones in that manner, and I'll make sure that that's set up for any members to do as well. Any other
Cool.
questions? Okay, I believe that.
All right, thanks again, Rob.
Moving on.
So, if all of that gear and some of these photos, so if anyone's seen anyone's actual astrophotography rig, they're very complicated. I always call them a spaghetti mess of cables going every which way, just because it is. It's a scope and maybe a second scope with different cameras and different. I mean, it's a pretty complicated setup, and I think a lot of people have a lot of fun, configuring and building and equipping all of those different things. Our next speaker, before we jump into the actual Astrophoto showcase, is going to show us a piece of hardware that's on the other end of that spectrum. There's a company that has actually developed what I would call an appliance astrophotography gear. And before I basically steal all of your words, Eric Swinski is going to share with us his Vespera astrophotography tool. Eric, all yours.
Yeah, but hey, how you guys doing? Yeah, my name's Eric Sherwinski. I'm down here at Dover. I'm one of your Phantom members. I've been a member of DAS for about 3 years now. I've only made a handful of meetings, so I apologize profusely. Now, like a lot of other people, I just don't have the time or the effort or the inclination, to set up my, telescopes to do photography. And this popped up. Now, Bionis is a French company. They started up several years ago. Now, several years ago, they did a Kickstarter for what they call the Stellina, which is the Vespera's big brother. Now, the Stellina is about a $4,000 telescope, but it's just absolutely amazing. So if you ever look that up, the reviews on it are incredible. Now, for the purists, this is blasphemy. Okay, this is the lazy man's, camera, but it's absolutely incredible what it can do. I'm going to open it up real quick. And open here. All right, so here it's opening up. Now, this thing is 15 inches tall, weighs about 11 pounds, and it's really quite incredible. The thing is completely automatic, so it runs under a let me get back to. It gets ran by this app. This app is the Singularity app. Now, the telescope itself actually is on its own network, so you can take it anywhere, and it'll hook up to 5 smartphones at one time. So as it's running, you can actually have 5 people downloading images off of that thing at the same time. Now, as you can see, the telescope's quite small. It's got a 2-inch aperture on it, and it's like I said, it's diminutive, but it's got an extremely strong chip in it. And it's completely automatic. So basically, once you initialize it, it takes about 5 minutes to initialize. The thing's ready to go. Now, its positioning is based off your location on your cell phone, but it's extremely precise. So once it initializes, it's ready to go, and you literally are going to pick a target for it to go to. And now, this thing also has the ability to put filters on it. So you have this little ring. So these rings, it comes with different filters. Now, I kickstarted this. So this was on a Kickstarter about 1.5 years ago. I'm actually one of the very first people to get this piece because I got the basic telescope. The more advanced telescopes are exactly the same item, but they come with all the filters and all the bells and whistles to it. But yeah, you can put the filters on it. It's got a hydrometer as well that you can, I'm going to do that later, that you can fit to it. Now the feet, it's got a small tripod. The feet are actually adjustable, so you can actually level it. And the charger is right here on the bottom of the telescope, and it actually is the place where you put your level. So it's a magnetic level, and it plugs right into the bottom of the unit, like so. Like I said, it's pretty automatic. Now, what the program does is once you get onto a target, it'll start stacking images once every 10 seconds. And it's done real time. So as you're watching, you can actually see it as it's stacking the images. And you can actually replay it. So there's a slider on the side of the image, and you can actually slide back to the first image to the latest. Now, one of the cool things about this is that it's got its own network. Now, let's say if you lose connectivity, if you walk away and you actually lose connectivity, now this thing's got about a 90-foot range. And of course, if you're in the house, that kind of blocks it, shortens it up a bit. But the cool thing is that you can leave this alone. You could disconnect and reconnect, and it'll actually give you the latest image that it downloaded. So it continues. It'll just continue on. If it loses tracking, let's say some clouds come over, it literally just stops. It'll just freeze on the last image that it had before the clouds came over. So talking to Vaonis, some people actually fall asleep and just let it run overnight. The images I got off of it, they'll have a recommended time for exposure or running time, usually between 30 minutes to 2 hours. So like if a target's about 30 minutes, I'll usually give it an hour or hour and a half. So it really does a great job of that. Let's see if I can share my screen. Hopefully this works. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the moon. Again, this thing is a deep sky object telescope. It's not designed to be aiming at the planets, as you can imagine. Here's the moon. Looks very average. Now, these shots were taken in very, really poor lighting conditions, as you can imagine. I live right in the middle of Dover, so the light pollution is pretty bad here. In addition, with the moon and everything else, you'll see that it gives you pretty good images. Now, here's your Fishhead Nebula. This took about an hour to do. Again, this is in really poor lighting conditions. I did do some other nebulas and just didn't pick them up. So I think with the right filters, it definitely will make a big difference. Here's another nebula. It's not shown very well. This is Jellyfish Nebula. And it shows pretty good, but you could see all the speckling from the light pollution that's causing the problem. A nice globular cluster. The Andromeda Galaxy. So as you can see, it does a great job. This is about an hour of exposures. I think it's about 300 images or so, or 280 images. And again, it's doing this completely automatically. And of course, the Orion Nebula. The Pleiades. Now, one feature of this thing that they're going to be adding later on is the ability to, what's the term, tile the images. And so you can actually get a bigger image out of these really sharp shots. Now, here's an interesting shot. Now, this telescope has a derotator built into the chip system, into the computer system. And this shows you exactly a really good idea of how the derotator is working. So you can see the streaks of lights. Now, this streak of lighting actually came from a reflection from a alley light. So you can actually see how the telescope is adjusting for the rotation of the Earth. And you can see this is one of the Leo's triplets. So it does a pretty good job. Again, the light pollution is terrible. It's what's causing this. So like this one I took yesterday, you can see the moonshine on the bottom of it, but it does a pretty good job. I think it's a surfboard nebula, and it does a really decent job. The Pac-Man Nebula, I think I had it on there for about 2 hours, and that's what came out. So it does a great job with and that's about it for those. So it shows you the kind of pictures that this provides. Now the Stellina does a far better job than what this does. Stellina's got a very higher resolution. It's got an expert mode, so you can actually adjust the ISO and the exposure. This doesn't give you those options. So if you're looking for any way to manipulate the images or anything, this wouldn't be the one to get. But this retails for about $1,500. But I think for the outreach, my personal feeling is the technologies that change. Like I'm a PC gamer, so I like VR. I really think this is kind of like the VR for astronomy. I think that this is, these kind of products are what is going to get people interested into it because it's easy. People don't have a lot of time, and it's just effective. To be honest with you, this is like the first telescope I've ever seen where what you see on the box is what you get. You always get those telescopes that shows the galaxies, the nebulas, and in my 10-inch LX90, all I see is a little fuzz of light. But this one does work. It works quite well. So I'm excited now. Once the filters start coming out, they haven't been produced yet. They're supposed to be released later on this year. This year they're going to have a light pollution. They have a good selection of different filters for this. They're even going to have a solar filter for it as well. So I think the potential for this technology is absolutely incredible. Now there is a new telescope that they're releasing to show you the high end of this technology right now. It's called the Hyperia. Now that is a 150 millimeter aperture telescope. I think it's like a 15-inch altogether, but it's 165 pounds weight, and it goes for about $40,000. But I couldn't imagine just how good those images that one gets when that comes out later this year or next year. So I think it's a wonderful thing. Literally, I could carry it. I put it out on my deck. I go back and I watch. I've been watching the Olympics, and I have the thing stacking images for me. It's that easy. Yeah, I guess in the hobby it's a sin, but it really does work. Anybody got any questions?
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, any questions? Actually, maybe
Yes.
just
Yeah,
to
Does
I have a quick
the,
question.
yeah, one second. The app itself, is that Android based or iOS based or both?
Both. It's both. So
It's both.
Apple, yeah, iPhones and Androids. It actually works for both.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so you don't have the filters yet. What filters is it using internally? Does it have a one-shot color chip, or is it using a filter wheel?
Yeah, I don't think it has any filters. I think it's just a CCD chip that's in the back of the image. Now, I think there is some filtering in the lenses. So if you do, you'll see some filtering elements in the lenses. So I think there is something in there. I don't think it's on the chip itself, to be honest with you.
You don't? Okay, because it looks like that's a one-shot color chip that they're using.
Well, it's quite possible. I mean,
because otherwise it would
we're
need
the expert on this than I
it would
am.
need to move filters in and out of the optical path to give you the color that you're seeing.
Right, I got you. You're probably right, I'm sure.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So you have to polar align this?
No, it's completely automatic. So when this thing, you put it out there, you go into you put into initialization, it goes up, and it's actually got the computer in here will automatically identify the star fields. And once it identifies the star field, it's aligned. It's automatic. So you literally, once it's aligned, you let it go, and the image will pop up, and it'll start stacking once it turns, aims into that direction, I guess.
So does it physically follow the stars in the sky?
Yes. This whole thing rotates. So the whole thing will actually.
And you said it derotates in software?
Yeah, well, what is, how it is with telescopes, even though it's following the Earth is rotating. So there is the computer in here automatically derotates the image to align the images as it's stacking real time, right? And then what happens is if you do it long enough, the picture actually gets narrower because it's actually derotating, and then the field narrows up as it's doing it. So otherwise, yeah, it's completely automatic. You can set it down in any angle, any direction. You don't have to line it with north. Once you set it down, you got this the button. You literally turn the button on, and the thing will do the rest. It'll go through. It'll turn on. You hook it up with your app, and there's an initialize button right there at the bottom of it. Once you hit the initialize button, it takes about 5 minutes for it to do the initialization. But yeah, it'll open up and automatically start tracking star fields and identifying the star field that's under, and it's done. And it's literally plug and play. And it's nice. It's handy because it's got its own network, so you don't have to have it on your own home network or anything. You can take it anywhere on the middle of Timbuktu, and it'll still work perfectly fine. Yeah, it's completely automatic. I haven't any problems with it. Sometimes you might have a focus problem because the autofocuser might not focus properly, and you might have to refocus it from time to time. That pops up where it'll come up kind of blurry. But I guess that's normal for the atmospheric conditions. If it's having problems with light pollution, things like that, it'll have a problem with focusing on the stars. But other than that, it's literally plug and play. It's that simple. There's no alignment required. The thing does everything itself. It'll put it out there and it'll find the stars, it'll align itself. And it's just amazing because once that picture pops up and it's right on the galaxy, boom, right there. And it's cool because it'll start up on a nebula and you won't see a thing. It's like, okay, I must have missed it. And sure enough, here it comes, within 10, 20 images, it's popping out. And it's an amazing experience to see it doing it in real time. Now, once you can take save photos at any point. So once it's taken stacking the images at the bottom, there's a little camera button. You can actually save the image at any point while it's stacking the images. And then it saves it into an album, and then you can download it and save it.
So, and those pictures you showed, you didn't process those. That's just
No,
how
I
they
did
come
nothing
out.
with them. That's strictly out of the telescope.
And what is it? What is it? A JPEG that it gives you? What is it? What's on the
Well,
phone?
you can save in JPEG or TIFF. So there's some people. There was a guy that was talking about that he was saving the TIFF images because he was doing post processing with the photos. So no, you can save either as a JPEG or as a TIFF. So it's your choice.
And you mentioned it uses a 10-second exposure time. Can you change that? Do you have a lot of control? You don't. You can't change it. Okay.
Nope. Now on the Stellina, it's bigger brother. You could do that sort of thing. You could adjust the exposure time, the ISO. There's a lot on the Stellina that this doesn't do. Again, this is a consumer product. It's designed to be as easy as possible, and so you can't adjust those 10-second intervals. What I'm excited is when they have what I was mentioning before is the mosaic feature. So later this year, they're going to be putting into the Singularity app the ability to have it do a mosaic. So you can leave this thing alone and it'll actually take, and you can choose how long you want for each image and actually create a mosaic image. So that's awesome for these like the Pleiades and the bigger areas. So I'm really excited about that. Now the battery on this thing lasts 4 hours. I'm looking over there. Sorry about that. The battery lasts about 4 hours. Now you can have this plugged in while it's charging, so you can have it running while it's plugged in. It doesn't have a cord wrap feature. That was one thing I talked to Leonis about. Was my concern that you'd have this thing tracking and all of a sudden it wraps the cord, and they don't have a cord wrap option, but it doesn't really rotate like a lot. It pretty much stays in the same place, so I'm not really too concerned about it. The charging, it takes upwards probably about 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours to charge the battery. So it takes quite a while. Now they do have a spare battery for this. You can get an external battery, so you can double that to 8 hours. There's no way of replacing this battery. This battery is completely internal to the unit, so you can't do anything with it. It's a sealed unit. What's cool about this telescope is this telescope's produced and built in France. It's not a Chinese telescope. It's strictly produced by Leonis in France. So they did it all in-house. So it really is a work of art. The amount of technology that was put into this, I think, is the beginning of the next phase. When it comes to these smart scopes, Leonis isn't the only one. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the EV scope. The original EV scope was kind of like a Newtonian, where you look into the eyepiece and it was actually a digital screen, which was kind of cheesy. They smartly did away with that idea. So this isn't the only company that produces these smart scopes. And I think as the technology prices start to drop, I really think you're going to start seeing these out in the stores. You're going to start seeing these out in the system. And I think it's a positive for the hobby, because I think if you get people that feel that this hobby is more accessible to them, and they see all this big galaxy pops up. I know when I showed my wife the photos, she was stunned. She's like, "That came out of that?" I'm like, "Yeah, it did." And so it's amazing that something so small, so compact, so easy to use. It's pathetically easy. That you get some really nice images out of here. I think it gets a lot of people excited. I've been showing it at work, and it's an amazing piece of kit, that's for sure.
Cool. Eric, well, thanks again. Really, really cool. Pretty interesting. And now we will shift on to the next portion of the program. And in celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Astrophotography Special Interest Group, Bill Hannigan and other members of the AP-SIG will be sharing some of their photos. So Bill, all yours.
Okay. Let me, this often takes a couple of times, so I'm gonna, nope, that didn't work.
Well, that did work.
Did it? Did you see
Yes, it
the,
did. We saw it.
Yeah,
you saw the presentation, not my editing screen?
looked like it, but it was quick.
It should be, now, there, now you should be seeing it.
There you go. Yep.
Okay. All right, so this is the presenters, or our presenters tonight. At the end of every individual person's discussion, I'd like to ask them to just wait a little while for questions to see, and if there are no questions, then we'll move to the next person. That way, if you need to access your presentation, it's all up and running and ready for you to get to. Okay. So we're going to start with Harry Dorsami. He's going to tell us about Barnard's Loop, imaging that. Dana Wright's going to show us the Fishhead Nebula and the Western Veil Nebula. Tell us a bit about that. Jared Bieber is going to show us the Heart, the Wizard, the Dumbbell, the Pelican, and the Rosette Nebulas, or nebulae, and Jupiter and Saturn. Mark Mitchell will tell us about and show us an image of the Antenna Galaxy and a monochrome arc galaxy. He didn't tell me exactly which. And Lou Varvarezis is going to do NGC 4565, M13, M33, and a couple of different videos. I've got a whole host of things. I'm not going to go over the list. And Igor Pashenko is going to bring up the end here with B174. A dark nebula and an ISS flyover. Okay, so Harry, you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you for the opportunity. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So first of all, I'm the newest member of the group, so thank you for the opportunity. So this is an image of Barnard's Loop taken from my community here in Willistown Township. So the nice thing about this image is you can see quite a bit of information from this one image. You can see the California Nebula up on the top here. You can see the Pleiades right over there. You can see M42 over here. You can see the Horsehead. You can see, of course, Barnard's Loop, and I'll show a different perspective by adjusting the exposure and the curves here shortly. You can see Betelgeuse. You can see Rigel. I think the images zoom is okay. There you go. You can see Rigel here. You can also see Rosette. You can see the Cone Nebula. You can see the flaming star right there, and you can also see some dark nebulae here. If I adjust the image a little bit, you can see a little bit of a different perspective here. It does overexpose some of the other nebulae here, but I just wanted to show this very interesting perspective. And the reason I wanted to show this also is because a lot of us think that our wide-angle lenses are useful only during the summer season, during the Milky Way season. You can actually put it to good use even during this time of the year when there's a whole slew of objects out there in the night sky. And you can actually capture this with nothing more than a simple star tracker and a DSLR. And I'll get to the gear I used in a second. So let me talk about how I produced this image. So the total exposure time for this was about 2.5 hours. Each image was about 45 seconds of exposure time. The and it was taken at about f2 at ISO 800. The camera that I used was an entry-level camera. It's the EOS Rebel T6. It is modified, and modification does help for capturing this image. The mount that I used is the Ioptron Sky Guider Pro, and it comes with an inbuilt software called iPolar, which allows me to do a polar alignment without having to crouch and look through the reticle at Polaris. And this is very useful for somebody like me with who's tall and has back problems and struggles to get a good view of Polaris. And sometimes I struggle to find think, is it really Polaris or am I looking at something else? It does have a counterweight system as well, despite being just a star tracker. So the nice thing is I can actually mount even a small refractor, even though it's a star tracker. Some additional accessories that I used are a William Optics high latitude base. I also mounted a Manfrotto fluid head, which allows me to mount a refractor if should need be. I put a lens heater and a remote intervalometer. I did attach a CLS-CCD clip-on filter on this. And this is very helpful because I live in a very light polluted community. I live in a townhome community just 5 miles east of Westchester. And if I look east of my community, I can see the light pollution from Philadelphia. So it's and to see Barnard's Loop from my community is not really something I can fathom, but it is possible. The lens is a Rokinon 16 mm lens, and the tripod was something that Ioptron provided. I used a Windows 10 laptop. I used Backyard EOS. Backyard EOS is an amazing software, and I used Backyard EOS primarily in this case to frame the image and to do the focusing. So I use the frame and focus feature to make sure that the stars are small and sharp. And then once I knew the stars were focused, I just disconnected the laptop, came indoors, I set the intervalometer to take 45-second exposures, and then left the equipment out in the freezing cold, came back indoors and let it do its thing. So I did this over four nights in order to gather enough subs. The data that I acquired was processed using Deep Sky Stacker, which is a software that is used to stack all these images to get a nice clean image. And then I use Photoshop to with a tool called Gradient Exterminator, along with astronomy tools to produce the final image. And the gear setup looks what you see over here. The star tracker here is the Ioptron Sky Guider Pro, and that's the Manfrotto fluid head. And the other interesting part here is I didn't use any narrowband filters here. This is just with a CLS-CCD filter. No plate solving. This is just frame and focus. All you have to do is make sure you get the 3 stars in Orion's belt in your image, and because it's a wide angle lens, as long as you can get the 3 stars, you should be able to get most of the objects that you saw in the earlier image in your field of view. So yeah, that's a little bit about my image. Any questions?
Quick question for you, Harry. You realize too, Backyard EOS you can list out all the images you want acquired, and Backyard EOS will just go to it and do it. So you don't have to use an intervalometer to trigger the exposures.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, it does a great job of that, in fact. So keep looking at it. There's a lot to
Okay.
that software that's not exactly obvious right at the beginning.
Oh, but I think you do need to leave your PC connected to it. I think that's the problem, right?
That's true. You want to have your
Yeah.
PC connected to it.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that because it was I think it was 20 degrees that night, so I wanted to bring
Well,
my
you know,
PC.
this is something that comes up all the time. Actually, laptop computers do very well in the cold. If you think it's a little bit damp, you can always put a plastic box, put them in a box turned sideways so that they've got a little bit of a hood.
Right.
But computers are very happy to be out in the cold. What they really hate is heat.
Right.
Okay,
No,
and
that's
so, and a lot of people have used computers for, all night long for, years and not had a problem with that.
yeah. No,
So,
that's a good point, Bill. One of the problems I encountered was the laptop battery discharges very quickly in extreme cold. So
okay, now that is a concern.
yeah.
Sure.
But that's a good point. I do use it in the warmer months. I use back at US with the laptop out in the open. But yeah, it's in the extreme cold. I just use the intervalometer and let it do its thing.
So you don't run AC power to your rig. You just run off batteries.
Yep.
Okay. An extension cord is a pretty useful thing.
Yes, that is
It's
something
fun.
I should consider. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you for the opportunity. So I think
You
Dana,
bet.
you're next.
I have one question.
Sure.
Can you tell me about the gradient removal tool?
Yes, the gradient removal tool is an extension of Photoshop. What it allows me to do is, if you have different gradients inside your image, and if it's what it does is it actually gives you three options. You can be aggressive, you can be mild, you can be, I forget the third option, and all you do is use a little drop down, and it actually evens the gradient for you.
Okay. Is
Pretty
it like
slick.
a plugin or is it
Mhm.
something
Yeah, it's
directly
a plugin.
available from within Photoshop?
No, it's a plugin. It's a third-party plugin.
Okay.
Yeah,
Does it cost anything or is it a freebie?
No, it's not a freebie. I can put the link in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah,
But it's gradient exterminator.
yes, and it's
Okay.
very useful especially when you modify your image, because when you modify your camera, your images come with this reddish tinge. So one of
Okay.
the things I do is I use gradient exterminator to get a more natural color, which is super helpful.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I'll look it up.
Thanks.
Okay, Dana, would you like to show us
Sure. We'll get started here. Right. I've got two images I'm going to show tonight. The first one is IC 1795, also known as the fish head.
Dana, can you start the actual PowerPoint
It should be up. It's up on my screen.
slideshow? I was
Is it
seeing
not?
your editing window. Usually what I find is you have to start the PowerPoint presentation and then share that.
Here, let me.
And that'll make what you show full screen instead of just a little bit of an editing screen.
Did you come up there?
Yeah.
Okay. So this This is the fish head. I took it in my backyard in my observatory. Got about 20 hours of time, a little over 20 hours. And it's done in a SHO Hubble palette. And I thought it came out fairly nice. I like the image. And, you know, don't really, I think it's about 6,000 light years away. It's about 1,500 light years across, I believe, if my memory is correct.
It's a beautiful picture.
The exposure time is 20.16 hours and 10-minute subs. I use an Aptura 6-inch f4, which is High Point Scientific's house telescope. Use a TelView Paracore 2 to as a field flattener corrector, and that adds 0.15 to the focal length. The camera is an S-Big ST2000XM. Guiding is done with a guide scope with a ZWO ASI 120 with an Orion 50mm guide scope. The location is the J.M. Wright Observatory in Landenberg, Pennsylvania. I use a Windows laptop, and I use K-stars with the Raspberry Pi in PhD2, and I processed it in PixInsight in Lightroom. The next image is the Witch's Broom, or the Western Veil, this is a 2-panel mosaic I took over multiple nights of exposure. I like the way it came out. It was my first attempt at doing a 2-panel mosaic. And I was fortunate I didn't get any really star pinches in the merge of the image. And it was also everything. This was a process was an HOO color palette instead of the SHO, which just means it's hydrogen alpha in O3. And the hydrogen alpha is in the red channel, and O3 is in the blue and the green. And that's how the color is made.
Dana, is there any chance you can rotate that 90 degrees? It's stretched out vertically and not taking up too much of the screen.
No, because when I tried to create the, I'm not very good with PowerPoint, so this is the only way I could really do it.
Okay.
Because otherwise it wouldn't fit on the page. I'm sure there's probably a way to do it, but I don't have the ability.
Okay, thanks.
And everything, this was 12 hours of time of 5-minute subs. It was 6 hours per each mosaic panel, and everything else was the same. The processing in PixInsight made it possible to do the mosaic. It took me not a lot of research, but it took me quite a few times before I got it all to come together. And if anybody has any questions, I'll probably answer them.
Oh, two very nice images. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Jared Bieber, would you like to show us your photos?
Sure, thanks, Bill. Let me try sharing and hopefully this will work. It's sometimes tricky with 2 monitors.
That's good.
Okay. So hi, my name is Jared Bieber. I've been a member for a while. I guess I'm a quiet member, you could say, but I've been around. So I'm gonna show a few images and hopefully I don't go over my time. But I'm gonna advance this or try to. Okay. So just a quick introduction. Do you see this bar at the top, by the way, or is it just for me?
Yes, we see a gray bar at the top.
Okay. let me actually see if I can just share my, just share, as you said, PowerPoint itself. Hopefully that gets rid of that. Is it gone?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Well,
So just,
actually, no, that's fine like that. Go ahead with that, Jared.
okay, you're just seeing just the slide itself, nothing else.
It looks like it should, and it's taking as much screen real estate as it can.
Okay. So just a quick introduction of myself. I developed an interest in astronomy in my senior year of college, 2016. I got my first telescope for Christmas that same year. I started doing astrophotography in the summer of the next year, 2017. My favorite objects to take are like large emission nebula. I just think they are pretty and they're large, so they can actually be printed out in a pretty high resolution, make good prints. In 2018, my parents moved to a farm in Middletown and I moved to Newark. I'm mentioning that because my gear is actually with them. I'm living in like an apartment complex and it's not a great location for photography. So anytime I want to take pictures, I have to drive 20-25 minutes down to their house. So it's a little bit of a trek for me when I want to do that. Don't always have the opportunity. And recently I've taken a little bit of a hiatus because I'm actually preparing. I've got some schoolwork I'm doing like online. I'm preparing to actually return to the University of Delaware and actually pursue a degree in astrophysics. And I actually aspire to be a professional astronomer someday. We'll see. So fingers crossed. Here's my imaging location. So my parents actually, they started an alpaca farm called New Groove Alpacas. It's off of Route 13 near the Delaware River, south of the canal, about halfway to Odessa. And the skies are pretty decent there, although we're about 5 miles directly south of the Delaware City refinery. So there's some glow in the north sky. But mostly, luckily, what I'm looking at is going to be kind of southward direction. Here's a picture of actually going back real quick. So actually, there's this little triangle patch of grass here is where I'll set up. There's actually a little pond here, and then like the barn, and then there's a hedgerow, and so there's in this little triangular patch of grass is where I set up, and then this picture here like shows me in that patch. I don't actually have an image of my current fully set up rig with all the wires and everything, but you can see here a couple of my telescopes. This is an Orion 6-inch Ritchie-Chrétien telescope on my Celestron AVX mount, which is my one mount that I have, and the Celestron AVX I believe is pretty much like the cheapest mount for astrophotography that you can get that actually gets the job done. So I use some relatively basic stuff. I don't go too crazy with it. On the right here is probably my main, I would say my main telescope, the Skywatcher EvoStar 80 ED epichromatic refractor. 600 millimeter focal length f7.5. Like I take most of my images with this, and also you can see my main camera, the ZWO ASI 1600 monochrome cooled camera with the filter wheel on it. Here's an older picture of kind of like an older setup that I would use. I still have this telescope. I use it for planets actually. This big thing is like a Celestron 8-inch Newtonian that I'll use still for planets, but that's pretty much it. But this is me at my previous residence, so a little bit older when I was more or less starting out. So here's the first image I have. This is the Rosette Nebula in Monoceros. Probably right off the bat, this is my favorite image that I'm sharing right now. This is the first color narrowband image that I did in color using H-alpha and O3 filters, and also this was my first attempt at a 2-panel mosaic. So kind of split vertically down the middle of this image. I took like a left panel and a right panel, and I stitched them together in the software that I use. Like facts on this object are that, like, in most pictures, in kind of natural, I guess you could say, quote unquote, natural color, it's a reddish, it's like all like red color. So this is why it resembles a rose. They call it the Rosette Nebula. It also looks like a skull too. Like you can see the eyes, like left eye, the right eye, and the nose here. I don't know if you can actually see my mouse, but you probably can't see my mouse, but
we
you
can
probably. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, you can make out that the skull there. I just like the amount of detail. You can see a bunch of little details all over from a relatively short exposure time, I would say, and goes into that on the next slide. I didn't want to bore anyone too much with like too many details on my production overview, but it was a 6.5-hour exposure over the H-alpha and O2. The color map I would call it a custom HOO, meaning like I used like pixel math and PixInsight, my main processing software, to kind of divert the H channel into red and green, like split it basically, and kind of in a way simulate the Hubble palette without actually having the sulfur filter. Yeah, so 6.5 hours with my refractor, with the AVX mount and the ASI 1600 millimeter. And then my main acquisition software is Sequence Generator Pro. And like I said, the processing software is PixInsight, my main processing software. The next image I have is the Pelican Nebula in Cygnus. I think most people display this image rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise from the way I have it, but I just kind of prefer it in this orientation, I guess, for whatever reason. I just kind of like it this way. I believe this was the first H-alpha image that I captured. The H-alpha data from this was the first that I captured in narrowband. The O3 data came a lot later, and actually the O3 data was pretty weak. And when I first tried to put them together, it came out like pretty flat and unappealing. But what I ended up doing almost by accident was I fed my H-alpha data back into the image, into pixel math as like a layer, and it actually made it kind of pop out, like the features became like puffy, I guess you could say, like especially on the right side here, and which turned out nicely. And I guess one fact I'll share about this, for anyone who doesn't know, like this little column of gas here, it's kind of hard to see on the slide here, but at the very tip of this column of gas, there's two like perpendicular little puffs or jets of gas, signifying that there's like a newborn star right at the end of that column there. That's kind of emerging from that gas cloud. So that's kind of interesting. Similar setup and production. This is like a 5-hour exposure in a more kind of natural HOO color mapping, with the same gear pretty much and the same software. This next one is the Wizard Nebula in Cepheus, and I wanted to kind of share. I made two different color schemes of this object. On the left is like the kind of simulated, I guess you could say, Hubble palette with the orange and blue, and then on the right is the HOO, more of a natural, I guess you could say, color scheme. This one on the right has a little bit more green noise in it. So it's a tiny bit noisier, but I just like having the two contrasting colors. I think they kind of complement themselves, each other nicely. And I also had to, I really like the O3 was really weak. So I had to basically go in there and artificially brighten the central region here with the blue on the left and like the green on the right. kind of artificially brighten it to bring it out more and make it have more contrast. Similar setup here, 11.5 hours exposure. And like I said, on the left was like the custom HOO, and on the right was the regular, I guess you could say, HOO with the similar, the Skywatcher refractor and the AVX and the ASI 1600 millimeter or 1600 mm, I guess you could say, maybe not millimeter, but monochrome. This next one is M27, the Dumbbell Nebula in Vulpecula, if I'm saying that right. And this was actually pretty short exposure. This was not narrowband. This was like wider band RGB. This is like your classic planetary nebula, easily visible with binoculars or a small telescope. And it's like a star that has ejected its outer layer and has left a white dwarf behind. And according to NASA, this is a good chance this is what will happen eventually to our sun, just kind of poofing out and shedding its outer layer like this. So for this image, I actually used my 6-inch Ritchie-Chrétien Orion telescope. It's got a longer focal length to see like the smaller object, and it was like a lot shorter exposure time, 2 hours with RGB color. But the same camera and mount and the software. And then finally we have the Heart Nebula and Cassiopeia. This is another one of my favorites. It's a pretty big nebula. I think it's like 330 light years across, and actually covers 2 full degrees of sky, which is an area 4 times the diameter of the full moon. The nebula is shaped by winds from there's these big, bright, young, energetic stars in the center here of the nebula that are just, the winds are just propelling outward and kind of shooting a big colorful hole in this giant gas cloud in space, which forms this heart shape. It just so happens to form this heart shape. The H alpha for this image I actually took during a bright full moon, like directly overhead almost, which kind of demonstrated to me at least like the power of narrowband imaging, because the details came out pretty good still, even though there was a completely bright full moon when I took the H alpha. And then the O3 came much later. The H alpha actually, this thing is so big that it took up the full field of view of my camera. And I just happened to get lucky with the H alpha, and it all fit into the same frame, although there's a bottom part to this nebula that got cut off, but the heart is there. So that's the important part, I guess, for me. But for the O3, I had to actually take a mosaic of that because I couldn't guarantee that I would end up with the same orientation that I got lucky with the H alpha. So I did end up having to take a mosaic of the with the H out for the O3 data. And as a result, it turned out to be a little bit on the longer side for the exposure time, but still not too long, 12 hours for the whole thing between the H alpha and then the 2 panels of the O3. And again, going back to my Skywatcher 80 ED refractor with the AVX and the 1600 ASI. And then finally, Bill wanted me to include my pictures of Jupiter and Saturn. I've kind of made multiple attempts to take images of the planets, like the big planets. I haven't always had the greatest luck. Part of the reason for that might be the fact that I set up my equipment right next to a pond, and I'm looking over top of the pond, so that probably doesn't help too much with like all the shimmering that might result in the air from that. But in any case, these are the best results I have so far from that endeavor. And I kind of quickly processed these in Registax and didn't do anything further with them. Jupiter, I think, turned out pretty okay. You can just about see some of the details from some of these bands, although it's a little blurry, but it turned out all right. Saturn has turned out a little noisy. You can probably see. I did kind of want to, I'd wanted to kind of try cleaning this up before giving this presentation, but I actually don't have access to my data. It's actually sitting on my laptop that I use for imaging at my parents' house. So I didn't have access to the data to try and give a second go at processing Saturn, unfortunately. But this was done with a one-shot. This is one-shot color with an IR cut filter. I think roughly 3,000 frames and the videos. This was like lucky imaging, 1 minute each for Jupiter and Saturn, because they'll rotate if you go longer for take a video for longer than that, and you don't want that. This is where I used my Celestron 8-inch Newtonian with the AVX, and then also I have the ZWO ASI 462 MC color camera, which is like a newer planetary camera that they've come out with, and then their ZWO's like in-house ASI capture software was what I used to capture the planets, and then Registax, and not too much else besides that. Pretty kind of simple process for the planets. So one thing I wanted to also add quickly, I thought it would be fun. Like I like to ask myself, like, where in the galaxy are these objects that I'm taking all these pictures of? And I can actually see that when I use this app, Sky Safari 6 Plus. You can actually see here, it'll give you, if you go into the app, it'll give you like an overview of an overhead view of like the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. And this is like a 35 light year view, overhead view. You can see the center of the galaxy on the right, and then you can see some of the spiral arms, the Perseus arm, the Sagittarius arm, and then our Orion spur where the sun is in the center. You can see M27 here is just a hop and a skip away from us at 1,400 light years, relatively speaking, so pretty close. But then the Pelican Nebula a little further away in the Orion spur, you can also see. And then further away in the other direction is the Rosette Nebula, kind of in this medium between two spiral arms. And then back in the other direction is the Wizard Nebula, a little further out, getting close to the Perseus arm there. And then finally, the Heart Nebula is actually within the Perseus arm itself at about 7,600 light years away. And I just think it's interesting that we're able, like with some relatively basic equipment, I'm able to get some pretty detailed views of objects that are in the next spiral arm over of the galaxy. I just think that fact is kind of interesting and kind of exciting to be able to have that capability to just see what's in a spiral arm of a different spiral arm of our galaxy. And also you can, the app will let you see, like, these are the constellations that happen to fall in the plane of the galaxy. And so you can see here that Cassiopeia is in, or the Heart Nebula is in Cassiopeia. The in Cepheus was the Wizard Nebula, etc. So like kind of like I like this feature of the app. It's pretty informative and interesting to just see where actually these things are in the sky. Well, not only in the sky, but also in the galaxy itself. But that's all I had. So let me know if there's any questions.
That's great, Jared. Thanks. I want to say you have nothing to apologize for about those planetary images. They look very good. That's about as much as you can expect from an 8-inch scope. So congratulations.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I try.
Yeah, and actually, and to tie into some of the new gear that the club got, planetary imaging is actually a great way to get started with astrophotography. So, thanks for sharing. There's some gorgeous photos.
Thanks.
So,
thanks everyone.
Mark Mitchell, would you like to show us what you've got?
How's that look?
Good.
About every year or two, I'd say. I try to do one of these Astronomical League observation programs, and a few of them you can do imaging on. And since I mostly do astrophotography, I think that's has been pretty neat for me the last couple of years. It gives me something to do when there's a full moon. And so this year I'm going to try and do look at some of the ARP peculiar galaxies. That's what I'm going to show you tonight. So Halton ARP was born in 1927 and he died about 8 or 9 years ago. He got his PhD from Caltech in '53 and he was in the same class with Alan Sandage. And he and Sandage were colleagues, although later in their careers they had more of an adversarial relationship. But I won't talk about that tonight. But ARP was on the staff at Palomar Observatory for almost 30 years. And he's most famous today, I think, for his Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies, which was published in '66. He's also well known for various controversial theories that he had. So, and just to remind you, Hubble made this famous, it's called the tuning fork diagram, when he classified galaxies. This was published in 1926. So that was a long time ago. That's people were watching silent movies and dancing the Charleston, but we still use this today. This is with slight modification. This is how we classify galaxies. But in about 1959, there was a Russian astronomer. His name was B.A. Vorontsov-Velyaminov, and he published a list of 355 odd-looking galaxies that didn't fit this pattern. And ARP picked up on this, and he had access to the Hale telescope, which is the largest telescope in the world, and he compiled his own list of 332 peculiar galaxies. So the pictures I'm going to show you, I take pictures with refractor telescopes. And it's sort of silly to show pictures of refractor telescopes because they're white tubes and they all look here like they're the same size. But I have one that's small. It's about the size of like a camera lens, a 70 millimeter. And then I have one that's a little bigger, the 4-inch. And then the big one at the bottom or big for me, is a 5-inch refractor. And I shoot all my pictures on the driveway, because unlike some people say like Rob, I really can't move this stuff around. It's also a nice example of what Jeff Lawrence calls spaghetti astronomy. So I have a laptop in that little box there, and that's the 5-inch refractor on the mount. And the whole thing's sitting on one of these scope buggies. So I used to bring it all out myself and set it up, but I'm too old now. So I drag it, I pull it out of the garage on wheels. Now I have to shoot, in order to get this, to do this list, I have to shoot 100 ARP galaxies. And many of them are very small, dim objects. Really, in a sense, they're too small and dim for the equipment that I have. So I'm shooting luminance only for most of them, unless they're a well-known nearby target. I'm shooting 30 minutes luminance only. And this is just an example of one, and how when I submit them, this is what they look like. So this is ARP 206. It's in Leo Minor. Right now it's probably directly overhead. And it's a spiral galaxy that we see on edge. And you can see that it is irregular looking in the middle. It's probably a starburst galaxy. Also, you can see, let's see. Right here, see this pale area? You can see it up here too, actually. There's an area of pallor. That's almost certainly a dwarf galaxy. That's a satellite galaxy of this one, and it may be responsible for this change. ARP had all kinds of peculiar ideas about what these things meant and used odd terminology, but in modern times, most of this stuff is due to galaxy-galaxy interaction, we think. So that's one example of one of the ones I'll shoot in monochrome. And this is another, just to give you an idea what they look like. So this is ARP number 6 in Lynx, and it's right here. And then what I do is I take these and I blow them up digitally. So there isn't really any increased resolution here, but sometimes you can see things better when you blow them up like this. So this is the Bear Paw Galaxy. It also looks a lot like, to me, like the international symbol for an on-off switch in electronics. It has some, you see these spots in here, so it has some activity there. There's another galaxy out here. There's also, you notice this one on edge here. So whenever you shoot away from the Milky Way at some of these little galaxies, there are lots of other galaxies in the background. And in fact, what I often have to do is, some of these galaxies are so small and dim that I'm not sure I took a picture of them. So I'm not sure they're there. So after I developed them, after I processed them, I plate solved them. So I plate solved this image. It confirms this is the Bear Paw galaxy, and then it shows all these other galaxies in the PGC catalog, which is pretty typical to have, 20 or 30 in a field like this. Now, I didn't want to show my pictures and only show these black and white images. So there are some ARP peculiar galaxies that are well known, like M101 is an ARP galaxy and M51 is an ARP galaxy, because ARP thought they were peculiar looking for his own reasons. In fact, if you look at any galaxy close enough, it'll have peculiarities, so-called peculiarities. So just like the Milky Way now, we know has various odd things about it with the Gaia data. So you've seen a couple pictures of this before. Rob showed some, and we saw some taken with that new fancy telescope. This is M81, M82. And this over here is NGC 3077. This was taken with my little refractor. So this is taken with the 70mm refractor. So it has about a 2-degree wide field of view, so I can get all the galaxies in one frame. And this is about a 10-hour exposure. And this is taken just in regular color, LRGB. Plus I threw in a little hydrogen alpha, and that lights up these areas of hydrogen fluorescence in this galaxy. So, which is M81. M81 is a typical, like a classic galaxy that would fit into Hubble's scheme, but obviously M82 does not. And this is an ARP galaxy. I'll show you that a little better in a second. This also, notice, see this pale area here? This is Holmberg 9. Holmberg was a Danish astronomer, and he has a catalog of only 9 galaxies. They're the ones that he happened to do photometric data collection on, and this is one of them. So now this is taken with the 5-inch refractor, so now we have a smaller field, and it's just of M82. And because of the gravitational interaction, it's thought, between this and M81, sometime in the last 100 million years, a lot of the hydrogen was stripped out of here, and you have these tendrils coming out. This is often called the cigar galaxy. It doesn't really look like a cigar to me. It reminds me, remember in the back of a comic book you could send away for a cigar that would blow up when you lit it? That's what it looks like to me. And it looks a little more explosive than that. It's incredibly bright. As the gases have collapsed in the middle, the center of this galaxy is 100 times brighter than the Milky Way. It has a huge black hole in the center with a big accretion disk. So it's a nice example of an ARP galaxy that we see fairly commonly because it's fairly close to us and it's a good target. And then lastly, I'll show you this one. This is, I had the antenna galaxies are in Corvus, and they're really too low for me to shoot very well. So I had to shoot them between the trees. So there's a gap between the trees, and I would get like an hour a night, and I was able to get 3.5 hours of this. And it came out better than I thought it would. It's a little noisy, but we often see these galaxies interacting because galaxies are, relative to their size, they're fairly close to each other. And we see, like the Mice galaxy and other galaxies where or even our own galaxy, we have the Magellanic Clouds where galaxies are near ours. But it's not common to see them like this, when they're run right together. And if you look on the internet and just search for galaxy mergers, let's say on YouTube, you'll find videos where people have mathematically modeled these and show as these spiral galaxies come together, they pass each other and they rip these long streams of stellar material out of them. So, and here we're looking at just a snapshot of it. It has these very bright objects here that are blue, which are young stars, and pink, which have hydrogen in them. And these were Vera Rubin, famous astronomer in the 60s, studied these, and these are sometimes named for her. So that's all I have really. And technically, this is what I'm using. It's just what I told you. The camera is an Attic camera, which is an English company, and it's a monochrome camera. So I shoot through different filters. And I had until recently an Ioptron mount. I recently replaced it with an AP-1100 mount. And the pictures you saw tonight, well, some of them were with one and some with the other mount. And I tend to shoot 5-minute subs because I'm in a Bortle 6 sky. And I use the kind of software that most people in the group use, PixInsight and Photoshop. So that's it, if you have any questions.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Mark, I just want to mention that's a cool astronomical camera, the Attic 460EX, correct?
Yes, it's cool. That's right. Although
Okay.
recently, I had been cooling it to minus only 5 degrees below centigrade. And the other night I was out and I noticed that it wasn't running, and it's because it was -8 out. So it was colder than the chip.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Very nice. So Lou, you out there?
I'm here.
Okay, you're up.
It says I cannot share.
Yeah, I'm
my
trying
screen.
to stop my share. Hang on 1 second here. I may have to turn this off. There we go.
There we go. Okay.
All right, let's see here. Can you see my screen?
Not
Hello?
exactly. It says it's starting, you've started to share, but it's black.
You still with us, Lou?
I still don't see anything, Lou. You might get out and try it again. Sometimes Zoom needs to be kicked a second time to get going.
I'm wondering if we've lost Lou entirely. Lou, are you there? Bill, maybe why don't we jump to the next one and we'll circle back to Lou if he rejoins us.
Okay. I'm up next. So I'll go ahead and I think this should do it. So you should be seeing the list of people now. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about quite a few photographs. I should mention up front, though, data acquisition for all of my deep sky images in this presentation was a joint effort with Rick Spencer. All right, I'm going to start out telling you about my scopes. This is the Tech Apo 140 refractor f7. I have a field flattener. I use a Windows 7 laptop with it pretty much all the time. In this case, it's inside the box acting as a sun shield. An Astrophysics 1100 mount, ATS portable pier, and this is during the lunar eclipse, so that's a self-made Bader solar filter.
Solar eclipse?
Yeah, total solar eclipse. Okay, the next telescope, and the one that's the real workhorse for deep sky imaging, is this Takahashi corrected cast grain astrograph in Rick's observatory. It has two focal lengths that we use it at, 1250 millimeters and 889 millimeters. There are focal ratios associated with that, and then focal ratios that take into account how much light is lost because of the secondary obstruction. Okay, the QSI camera on the back has 5.4 micron pixels, and that leads to a pixel size of 0.89 arc seconds per pixel for the longer focal length and 1.25 arc seconds per pixel for the shorter focal length. That's just about ideal, or those are just about ideal, because seeing is typically around 2 arc seconds or more in long exposures for us. Okay, the third scope I used on a couple of shots is the DAS 12-inch f4 imaging Newtonian that you see here. And again, as always, computers involved. You may not like the idea of using a computer out in the dark, but in fact they're warm enough. They can be used in the dark without developing a lot of dew. And if it's a particularly heavy night for dewing, you can just put them in a plastic bin turned sideways, and you'll essentially have no problem with the dew. But I've used mine for many years that way. I've talked to many other astrophotographers, all of whom use computers in observatories and typically Windows computers, because that's the operating system that almost all the software for astrophotography is made to run under. Okay, so I'm going to start with my oldest image first. This is a meteor from the Leonid 2001 meteor storm. And I actually made this image on 100 ASA Kodachrome and then took a picture with a DSLR to convert it to digital. Okay, you can see the beehive here and the meteor. Okay, after converting it, naturally I use some digital image processing to clean up the background, get rid of the vignetting, give it a more neutral color background. This is the backwards question mark of Leo, and the radiant for the Leonid meteor shower is just in here, almost between these two stars and the question mark. Okay. I'm going to zoom in a bit here. And of course, the most important feature about this meteor is it's bright enough for one, but secondly, it's showing very definite color change. Now, I've boosted the saturation a bit to make that a little more obvious. Okay, but there's no doubt there's a color change in that meteor. Could be a change in temperature, it could be different material is being blown off of the meteor as it passes through the atmosphere, and that's emitting different colors of light depending on what's coming off of the meteor. There's actually a second meteor here, very dim. If you draw a line from this one and this one, they both go right back to the radiant. So proving that there are indeed Leonid meteors, not random meteors. Okay. All right, next, this is from the transit of Venus in 2012. It was a dark and stormy day, pretty much that entire day, right? Very close until the transit, and even pretty long after the transit got started, we were clouded out pretty seriously. But at the New Garden Township Center, where I had arranged the star party, we got lucky, and there was a break in the clouds, and eventually complete clearing for a period. So this is Venus passing in front of the sun along with some clouds. And here's Venus in front of the sun with the clouds cleared out. And you can see some of the sunspots that were present at the time. Next, this is from the total solar eclipse, August 20, 2017. You can do a longer exposure to show more of the corona, but this is part of a sequence. Okay, and as luck would have it, an airplane flew into the eclipse during one of the exposures and came out the other side during the second exposure. It's more blurred over here because the second exposure is a longer one, twice as long as the one when the plane entered. Okay. The west side of the sun during the eclipse had a number of fairly bright prominences, this one in the middle being the most interesting. And we'll zoom in on that. That is sometimes described as the fox. You can see a head with eyes here and the body and a big bushy tail draping over that way. So it's not a bad fox, I guess. Okay. This is the total lunar eclipse from January 20th and 21st back in 2019. And this particular night was 14 degrees out with 50-mile-an-hour winds, wind gusts anyway. And so it was really cold. Nobody else wanted to come out with me that night. So I came out and photographed the eclipse using the 12-inch f4 in the Solon. There's no saturation boost to this. The camera was set to daylight color balance. This is real color. A lot of times I've seen and even experienced lunar eclipses where the color wasn't that great and you had to play around with it a little bit. This didn't require any boosting. So it counts as a really good lunar eclipse. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see more of the details on the moon, but also stars in the background. It's always nice to have stars in a lunar eclipse shot, just to make it clear that this is actually the moon in the sky, not some disembodied artistic creation. Another star there, another one down here. One of the things I really enjoyed about this particular eclipse is not only was it a dark red color on the one side, but we got a kind of a yellow-orange glow down in this part of the moon that you don't always get in a lunar eclipse. Okay, and despite all the wind, in between the wind gusts, it was possible to get a very sharp image of the moon. Okay, one other planetary image I want to show is Mars from fall of 2020, or a couple. These are taken about, what looks like 2 weeks apart, and you can see how rapidly Mars shrank in that 2 weeks. It lost 25% of the visible area in terms of angle on the sky in that amount of time. A lot of different features could be identified this time around. This was clearly one of the best apparitions of Mars in a very long time. I've been watching Mars for 25 years, and this is the first time I've been able to see or record this level of detail on it. Okay, so I'm going to switch to deep sky images at this point, and the first one is I'm going to show you is the Lagoon Nebula, M8, and this first image is in true color, which means that the image was color calibrated photometrically against G2V stars in the image. Okay. Like most emission nebula, this one is dominated by hydrogen alpha emission. It's red here, it's red there, it's red pretty much everywhere, because H alpha is easily the strongest source of light in this nebula. Okay, and it's a very pretty image, I think, but there are ways to show even more detail. And this is one of those ways with narrowband imaging, in this case using an SHO mapping. And we'll talk about what that mapping means a bit later. But using SHO mapping, I produced this image. And if you watch, actually look at the light, what's going on in this part of the original RGB image in this area. And you'll see there's a lot more showing up in the SHO, the narrowband image, than what you can see easily in the red. Now, if you really look closely, you'll see evidence of the same basic structures, but they don't jump out at you the way they do with the SHO. The other thing I really like about this particular version is that it gives you at least it gives me a three-dimensional sense of this nebula. It's like I'm looking down into a tunnel with this bright light at the end of the tunnel, and all of this stuff swirling around on the outside walls. Okay. And we can zoom in a bit and pan around. Down in the lower area, there's what looks like the figure of a woman on a diving board getting ready to do a backflip. Okay. Lots of other detail to see. Okay. So that actually was a bit of a zoomed in view of this object. Here's the full frame. There's some subtle information in the outer part of this, but I'm not going to dwell on it any further. Okay, the data acquisition for this object, first, of course, it was with the CCA 250 and the reducer, astrophysics mount, QSI 683 camera, which is a monochrome CCD camera that's cooled, in this case, to -20 centigrade, and it has a built-in off-axis guider. The guide camera was a Starlight Express Ultrastar, which has a somewhat larger sensor than normal, making it easier to find guide stars. Software was Windows data acquisition software, including, of course, the ASCOM drivers, who the main benefit of which is they're written by the manufacturers of the hardware, not an independent somebody who decided to write another device driver. So I also am using AP-SIG Pro astrophysics custom mount. I won't say improvement, I'd say elaboration software. It's a way to empower the operation of the mount, give you more with your mount. Sequence Generator Pro, as so many people use, and PhD2. And then sub-exposures were 10 minutes with each, 11, 17, and 18 for H-alpha, S2, and O3. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this for every one of the images. I'm only doing this once so that you get an idea generally what I do, and then I'm just going to talk about the objects after this point. So for this object, the total exposure time was 7 hours and 40 minutes. Typically, I'll use anywhere from 2 hours to 20 hours of total exposure time. Okay, with narrowband exposures always being 10 minutes and broadband, that is red, green, blue, and luminance, always being 5 minutes. In terms of image processing, I used PixInsight for the entire process. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about key aspects of image processing as we go along. But there's not too much point going over all of what I did here, except to say there's a sub-exposure calibration and integration stage. There's removal of background gradients and neutralization of the background, combination of all the master frames, the sulfur, hydrogen, O3, red, green, blue, luminance, to produce an RGB master, some noise reduction, and various other processing steps, including stretching to make the image visible. Okay, so this is the Elephant Trunk Nebula in SHO narrowband, and just to reinforce what that means, sulfur data is put into the red channel, hydrogen is put into the green channel, and oxygen data goes into the blue channel. So it's just a simple sequence substitution in this case. So let's see. And this is also known as the Hubble palette. I'm going to zoom in a bit. And by the way, because O3 is in the blue channel, the blue you see here is where O3 is strong in the image. The yellow is an interesting result of a blend of hydrogen and sulfur. And that's we're not going to go into the processing or the data acquisition on that. So this is the Helix Nebula. This is mapped in HOO, which means hydrogen goes into the red channel, oxygen goes into the green channel, and it also goes into the blue channel. HOO for a narrowband image is one of the closest to true color that you're going to see. So okay, if you zoom in a little bit and look at this, you can see striations running through the nebula, all pointing away from the central star. The basic explanation is that concentrated points of or areas where matter is concentrated have been eroded, and the outer, less dense areas have been pushed away, leaving a trail of material leading away from the denser parts. Okay, and that's a common explanation for a lot of the structure that you see in emission nebula. Okay, if we compare that narrowband version with an RGB photometrically color calibrated version, you see the outside of the nebula is still red, the inside of the nebula is still teal. There's not as much detail visible because not as much data was acquired to produce this image. But overall, color-wise, they're really quite similar. Okay, so in a lot of cases, if the mapping is HOO or something that works well for color balance, you might end up with a result that actually isn't too far off what people consider true color. It doesn't need to be, but if you need it, if that's what you want, you can get it. You can make that happen. So this is the Iris Nebula, and this is, instead of narrowband, is now red, green, and blue, but with a luminance added to it. The basic idea is that if you take a lot of luminance frames, you're capturing red, green, and blue photons at the same time, and so for any given amount of time, you're capturing more light and can get a higher signal to noise. And then the luminance is used simply to decide how bright the image is anywhere in the image. And the red, green, and blue are only used to determine the color at that location in the image. Okay. So this is a reflection nebula. We're seeing the blue reflecting off of dust in the area, and we've got a lot of dark dust features in the nebula. Here's another reflection nebula, M45, or the nebula around the Pleiades. Okay, this is probably the best reflection nebula that I know of. For sure. Let's see. I'm going to zoom in just a bit. And you see there are a lot of fine striations in this nebula, so there's a lot of detail to capture there, at least in parts of it. Okay. This is the Merope Nebula, and back in the early 20th century, visual astronomers would look at the Pleiades. Some would say, "I can't see that," and mostly it's because they were blinded by the extreme brightness of all the stars in the area. And then other astronomers would respond, "Oh, but this is the most magnificent nebula in the heavens," and they would go on debating the value of the Merope Nebula. Okay. This is actually a faint nebula from the Sharpless catalog. Sharpless listed a bunch of emission nebula, typically hydrogen, but often included oxygen and sulfur as well. This one's shown an HSO narrow band, which means hydrogen goes into the red. That's a good natural choice for making the nebula look typical. Sulfur goes into the green channel, and then oxygen goes into the blue channel. So what that does is the sulfur being adding green to the image is adding it to an area that's always got some hydrogen with it. So that green and red is mixing to give us a yellow-orange color. Oxygen similarly is mixing with hydrogen and where it's bright, and it's giving us purple because you've got blue and red making purple. Okay, but the feature, apart from the color, the feature that I really like here is the columns of dust down here in the bottom. And interestingly, they're not all pointing in the same direction. They're generally pointing up this way, but they seem very askew. They're not aligned the way they were in the Helix Nebula. Okay. So this is the Whirlpool Galaxy, and this is with that CCA 250 instrument with the long focal length. Okay, it's mapped using luminance, hydrogen plus red in the red channel, green in the green channel, blue in the blue channel. So you'll notice this isn't taking up very much of the screen real estate or very much of the total image. And that's common with a lot of galaxies. Many galaxies are pretty small, and so it makes it difficult to produce a large, highly detailed image of it. And it also means that to get a detail in it, you've got to be careful to go out when the seeing is good, and spend extra time in the processing to get the most detail out that you can. The H alpha has boosted the red in a few spots throughout the galaxy, but not very many. This is not particularly jam-packed with hydrogen alpha emission. There's just a moderate amount. Okay. This next image is the Trifid Nebula, or M20. Again, it's mapped with hydrogen alpha and red together in the red channel, and then green and blue in their respective channels. One of the things that's interesting about this is the nebula itself. What you remember, the first deep sky object I showed tonight, the Lagoon Nebula. The red was a deep red. Okay, this is not such a deep red. We've got some purple shades and something else going on here, and then we've got a blue reflection nebula on the side. Okay, so why is this odd? The answer is that it's not just a hydrogen emission nebula. There's actually a very strong blue reflection nebula directly underneath the hydrogen, or directly in the area where the hydrogen emission is taking place. Okay, in fact, and this is the H alpha master, and this is the blue master. So you can see there's actually more blue emission in this area where the hydrogen alpha and the red is strongest than there is in the rest of the nebula that we see as being blue. Okay, and that's why we're seeing the shades of purple here. Okay, this is M106 in LRGB, again with a little bit of a saturation boost. Some galaxies do have a little bit of color, and some have almost no color, and so almost always you need a little bit of a color boost or a saturation boost to show what they've got. Okay, but what's really interesting about this is how many other galaxies there are in the frame. Besides M106, there are 28 principal galaxies, or PGC objects, from the Principal Galaxies catalog, and another 20 that are even fainter. Okay, zooming in on M106, now you can see there's hardly any hydrogen emission areas in the galaxy, and only a very small number of star-forming regions. So this is almost, you wouldn't call it a dead galaxy exactly, but there's just not very much going on. Okay. And we saw the trio and Leo a little earlier tonight with the Vespera. So I'm going to show you that. This is the Hamburger Galaxy along with M65 and M66. So let's take a look. The nicest or the best part of the Hamburger Galaxy, I think, is that you can actually see light coming through the dust lane. In a lot of galaxies, the dust lanes basically are just a blockage, and light has to go around in order for you to see it. In this case, it's coming through it. We move up to M65. It's got some detail, some feature to it, but it doesn't really have much by way of color. We go down to M66, and now we see some blue star-forming regions and some pinkish hydrogen emission regions. Not overly colorful, but nevertheless, there's a lot more going on here than in M65. I should leave that there for a second. Okay, this next object is the Bubble Nebula, aptly named for the bubble, actually a planetary nebula inside of a larger hydrogen or larger general nebula, emission nebula. In this case, let's back out. So this is mapped HSO again, which means sulfur is going to show up as orange or yellow wherever it's strong, and oxygen is going to make itself known by turning the red purple, where there's hydrogen everywhere in the nebula, and it's just a question of how much oxygen you add or how much sulfur you add, emission you add, as to whether you're going to see that color shift. Let me zoom back in here one more time just for you to get a look. Okay, and then down and to the right here is a M52 open cluster. Okay, that's just a zoom. This next object is the Northern Pinwheel Galaxy. There's a Southern Pinwheel Galaxy designated, I think, M83. And this particular version of the image has the background raised up somewhat, that is somewhat brighter than I would normally make it, so that you can easily see the faintest parts of the galaxy trailing off into the darkness. Down at the bottom, and this is one I think considered one of the peculiar galaxies, isn't it, Mark? Okay, the lower branch actually deviates quite a bit compared to the pulls away from the galaxy down in this direction. The explanation is that dwarf galaxies like this one are actually tugging at it and pulling it out of shape. Okay. There are not too many other principal galaxies in here, a total of 5, and then a couple of NGC galaxies. Okay, and we've already zoomed in on it, so we don't need to. And compared to M51 or I forget which the other galaxy was I showed you, M101 is just chocked full of hydrogen emission areas all along its spiral arms, and plenty of blue star-forming regions as well. So this is an extremely active galaxy compared to the ones I showed earlier. Oh, sorry, shouldn't have done that. I've got to reshare my screen. Give me a moment. I've got to actually. Okay, you should be seeing the galaxy again, are you? Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. One too many escapes. All right. So the next object I'll show here is the Eastern Veil Nebula, excuse me, in HOO. Again, this is a color mapping for narrowband that does a pretty decent job giving you color that looks normal, we'll say. Okay. I'm going to zoom in on the lower left part. This is a section that's nicknamed, one of a couple of objects that are nicknamed the flying bat. You might not see it right away, but consider there's the head, here's an ear, here's another ear. His body is stretching along this way. He's got a couple of talons here, and then a wing swinging up this way, and another one down in this direction. And after you look at it a little while, it makes a pretty good bat. So one of the most amazing things about this nebula really is the great separation between the oxygen emission regions and the hydrogen. Most of the other nebulas I showed you, wherever there's oxygen, there's almost always hydrogen. And so when oxygen shows up, it turns the nebula purple. Here, oxygen is showing up entirely by itself, and hydrogen is largely by itself, which is quite unusual. Not again. I have got to get another key for that. Okay, we should be back one more time. Okay. The next image I'll show you is M97, the Owl Nebula, along with M108. This was done in LRGB. Okay. The M97 has 3 concentric shells, one of which is barrel-shaped. I can show you 2. I'm not sure where the third one is on this. And then they refer to M108 as a barred spiral galaxy with somewhat loosely wound arms. To me, it looks like a tangled octopus. And there's supposed to be a black hole in this that with 24 million solar masses. It sounds really excessive, but who knows? Okay, so we'll zoom in on M97 first. The outer shell is easiest to see if you look first at the red area over here that comes all the way out to the outside edge of the outer shell, and then you can kind of see a faint blue outline around here that shows the rest of the outer shell, and then you've got the inner shell, and there's a little bit of hydrogen emission right here on this face of the inner shell. It swings around back on the inside of the outer shell. So where the third shell is a mystery to me. I haven't got a clue. Little galaxy there.
Bill.
Yes.
The third shell, you think it could be referring to the blue area in the middle where that ends?
You're thinking in terms of the deeper blue in the center?
Yeah.
That could be. I don't know. I'd have to.
There's a distinct separation between that, then the red color, and then the darker blue.
Yep. Maybe that's it. And then you have the characteristic darker areas here that make the eyes of the owl. Okay, and this is M108. That does not look like a regular organized spiral galaxy to me. But anyway, there we go. So Mark, I think you did M81 and M82. I can skip this one if you like. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were doing that. I guess as long as we're here, I'm gonna show. There's M81. There's H-alpha enhancement of the emission nebula in there. This doesn't have very much detail to it. It's a very uniform, very I won't say blasé, but there's not a lot of high contrast detail here. I've done what I can to show you what there is here. Okay, let's go this way. Okay. So, and this is M82, and as Mark pointed out, lots of striations and hydrogen being ejected perpendicularly out of the galaxy. Okay, I think this is the last object. This is the Tadpoles Nebula in dynamic SHO mapping. And what that means is that there are a couple of factors that contribute, in this case, to the red channel, sulfur and hydrogen. But hydrogen is only allowed to contribute when oxygen is very low, at a low brightness. If oxygen is stronger, the hydrogen is not allowed to contribute to the red. That's dynamic mapping. What that does is it helps bring color balance back to the stars, and it also enlarges the area of oxygen emission that you can see in the image. These are the tadpoles, by the way. So anytime you do SHO mapping, you invariably have to stretch the sulfur and the red channel and the blue channel a lot in order to make the hydrogen, which is green, not overpower the result. And as a result, you typically get a lot of purple, because that exaggerated red, exaggerated blue in stars is going to show up as a magenta hue, okay, a magenta color. So commonly then it's necessary to remove some of that magenta. I'm not going to go into how that's done. I'm just going to tell you it is done. And there's none of it done here. About a 25% in this image, 50% here, 75% there, and 100% there. Okay, so you can pick which one you like. I tend to favor the one in the middle. Okay, and that's it for me. Happy to answer any questions if somebody has questions. Anybody?
All right, thanks, Bill. And it does look like we've got Lou back, so.
Oh, okay. Okay. So next up normally would be Igor. Lou, I kind of took your spot in the program since you were having some connection difficulties. Are you ready to go?
I don't know what happened. Let's try it again.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing here and let you.
All right. Wish me luck. Okay. Hey, I think it's going to work this time. Can you guys see my desktop or slideshow? Okay.
Yes, we see yeah.
There's a collage of a bunch of. I'm not going to show
Yes.
you guys all these images, only a couple of these, but I got to tell you how I started in this hobby. I bought my first telescope when I was a kid. When I saw Saturn, I was floored. Then I saw the moons of Jupiter. Then I don't know what happened. I went to college. Then I graduated and I bought a telescope and a microscope. I spent more time with a microscope. You know, I'm a pharmacist, so I'm looking at microbiology stuff. Eventually, I got myself a Dob. And after 2 years of squinting and using averted vision, I said, this sucks. You know, there's got to be something better. And I just happened to be talking to a friend of mine in Seattle, and he had told me he found a Canon EOS Rebel 1000D in the parking lot, in the Fry's parking lot in Seattle. Now, this was 2016. That camera was obsolete in 2009. So he said he had no use for it, and he sent it to me for free. And I'm thinking, okay, astrophotography for free. Yes, here we go. Let's get started. When I first got it, I took a picture. Yeah, I couldn't see anything. So I'm like, oh, I got to get this thing modified. So the free turned into $200. And now I have an observatory in my backyard. So it's a slippery slope. But anyway, since we started with galaxy season, or we're coming up on galaxy season, I figure that maybe we'll start with the first object, which is the Needle Galaxy. And let's see here. But before we do that, let me show you my setup. Everything you see here, unless otherwise noted, is taken with this equipment. I'll show you a closer look of the imaging train, but there's my DSLR camera, the obsolete one. I still use that one. This camera was responsible for all the images you see there. Just a regular DSLR camera. One of the things that probably helped me the most in getting good images is this contraption right here. This is an inline focuser. This has allowed me to acquire a lot of data very easily. Making, and it refocuses. I set it to refocus every degree of temperature change. It only takes a few seconds, and I am guaranteed to have perfectly focused images all night. And then this thing right here is the focal reducer, which takes the tube from 2032 millimeters to 1422. And then, just like everybody else, imaging acquisition software, SGP, Backyard EOS, PhD2, all runs off ASCOM. I have this little computer that's dedicated to running the observatory here. This little contraption, I think it was like $200. It's like a Celeron processor. So as long as it's an x86 machine, you can run any of the Windows software that's compatible with the ASCOM platform. So this comes in handy. I also, when I built the observatory, besides Wi-Fi, I have it's hardwired. So I have Cat7 cable going straight into the to the shed. What's great about Cat7 and the shielded, the twisted pairs, I put that right in the same conduit as the high voltage power, and it doesn't disrupt the signal at all. I was completely surprised at any rate. All right, so here's a close-up look. So here's the camera. This is the Orion thin OffAxis Guider with my QHY camera. And I've made a few modifications. I don't know if you can see these little blue strips here. They are zip ties. And the reason why I have zip ties there is because just by chance, I discovered that they were the exact right size, so that when the camera's screwed in and up against those, it's parfocal with the back of the camera. So I was going to 3D print something, but I mean, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So, I guess when I drop one of these and I can't find it, then I will 3D print something. All right, this is the focuser. Yeah, I did 3D print this thing, this contraption. This is the main focus knob. It's really hard to make fine adjustments, but if I ever want to turn the main focus knob, I can do it easily with that little gear. And here's a shot of the observatory right here. You can see my backyard. It's full of trees, but this area here to the left, this is west and north. This is north here, and this is west. So there's not that much. We're really looking at in the north. Everything is down in this direction, and you'll see in the next shot, I got a pretty clear view from the observatory of the sky. So, everything moves across this way. The only thing I'm missing out on is in this side of the sky are comets, if any comet comes this way, but because there are trees here, I'm not going to see them anyway. So that's what I'm looking at, and there's my house. Unfortunately, this canopy got destroyed by the storm, but oh well. All right, so this galaxy, the Edge-on Needle Galaxy, I think was one of the first images that I took of a galaxy that I was happy with. Now that I look back at it, I can see that I could have taken more data. It's a little bit noisy, but it still shows some pretty good detail here. You can see the dust lane in the center with varying detail. I can just zoom in a little bit. And there's, if you look around here, there's a lot of interesting stuff. This is a very galaxy rich area of the sky. You can see there's a lot of interesting objects. I mean, this is in the part of the sky that is coming up now, near the Virgo cluster. All this is in Coma Baracini. How the hell do you pronounce that? Baracines? Anyone? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about, just above Virgo. All right. This next object, you guys know, we've seen the Triangulum galaxy. That's not part of, obviously, the galaxies associated with galaxy season. Nonetheless, still a very nice galaxy. And I actually acquired data on this by accident, not by accident, but it wasn't really on purpose. I was planning on using creating this with a 2-panel mosaic. And in the fall, and while I was waiting for, I don't know, the horse head to come up or another object to come up, I would move my telescope here and fine tune focus and get the guider calibrated and everything. It was really high in the sky. It was a lot of stars, easy to see. And before I knew it, I had collected 6 hours and 50 minutes of this data. So I just stacked it all together, and this is what we got. And you can see that the H alpha regions came out. They're a little peachy. I suppose I could process this again, but you can see here. These are just with a regular DSLR, but that has been modified. All right, this is one of my favorite objects. I love M13. And the first time I saw this through my Dob, I was at a star party and the DVAA was throwing at the Valley Forge. And, I'd already seen Saturn and all that. So this, when I was able, I first saw it, I remember it wasn't quite dark yet. So I looked, it just looked like a little smudge. What the hell is this I'm looking at? Once it got dark and you can resolve the pinpoints, oh man, a shiver went down my spine. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was, anyway, this hobby is just so addictive. Well, at least it is for me. But what's really cool about this image is you can see this is a super, super old glob cluster. And some of these stars, you see, they look blue. Now, not an expert on the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram by any means, but I think these blue stars are off the main sequence. They're blue stragglers. If anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know how they relate to these red ones. Are these red stragglers? I don't know. Is that what they're called? I know the blue ones are blue stragglers. If anyone has any insight. Anyway, there's the details on how I did that one. Now this one, if you notice, there's some pretty heavy vignetting here. There's even some dust mode. This is another target that I would use to frame and focus because it has a lot of stars. So this is just a bunch of data that just got smashed together without, any intention of making this or using the data to create a final image. It looked good, so I kept it. And if you notice my workflow here, it's pretty much the same for most of my images with some minor differences. Basically, when I process, when I'm in the linear state, when the data is raw and untouched, I like to do denoising on it at that point. I also depending whether if I'm shooting a galaxy that has a lot of detail, and if I have the stomach for it, I will try deconvolution. Other than that, after I stretch the data, then I usually separate illuminance and the color, and I process them separately. And I find that also gives the best result, and then later on I recombine them when I'm happy with the results. So here's an image I took of the Horsehead Nebula. Now this particular one was a little bit tricky because of, Alnitak sits like right here. And then there's another, what's the other star here? Is it Sigma? I can't remember. This one's also a pain. Creates a lot of glare. So I had to find the exact angle that I could put this on. That's why the Horsehead is cockeyed. And actually makes the picture look good that way. I think it makes it interesting. But there was still glare. But the good part is I dithered aggressively. This moved around a lot. So it was a little bit easier to remove some of that extra, the artifacts that the stars, the extra light left. This was, I think I started with 18 hours of data on this, but because of clouds and satellites in the cloud data, I couldn't remove all the satellite trails. Well, I mean, I know a technique now that I could use, but back then I didn't know that. So I just eliminated those subs. I don't think it made too much of a difference. I'm pretty happy with this. I should probably add H-alpha data to this at some point. I have an H-alpha, now a 12 nanometer filter for my DSLR. It's just one of these clip-in filters that seems to work pretty good, actually. I just need to combine the data. So you can see the bright red emission nebula, the reflection nebula down here. And there's a lot more going on here that I think we can bring out with more data. This is another one of my favorite objects, the Running Man. I like this object. It's just so cool, but it's so often overlooked because M43, M42 steal the spotlight. They're so close that I bet you if this was in another part of the sky, it would be photographed more often. But anyway, I think it's a beautiful nebula. You can see there's both reflection and emission qualities or characteristics here. There's 8 hours and 20 minutes of that. I don't know if some of you guys might remember I had a problem with this trying to remove some dust motes from the data. And for a year, I was racking my brain. I couldn't figure out, I inadvertently switched the camera to auto sensor clean. So every time I turned the camera on, it would clean the sensor. And since I always leave the camera on and turn it on from the plug, and I'm inside the house, I don't see the message. I had no clue that was going on until the one day I was out there and I saw the sensor being that solved the flat problem. It was moving around the dust motes so they wouldn't line up when I divided by the flats. All right, so this is an interesting movie here I made of Neowise. This is the same camera, except that it's not attached to the telescope now. It's just on a tripod. And I used, this is at 85 millimeters. I used a Tamron lens designed to work with my old Nikon film camera. And since I bought this right before digital photography became popular, I spent, I think, $2,000 on all my film equipment. I was really pissed. But anyway, a simple bayonet adapter that cost $11 on Amazon allowed me to use it with the Canon. Here's the exposure information. This is over 45 minutes, I think. Yeah, anyway, so you can see the airplane zipping by here, but what's cool, if you look here, right about now, you'll see the ISS coming by. There it goes. Did you see it? See that zipping by real fast? And you can tell it's the ISS because look how fast it's going. You'll see it in a second here or two. Right there. If you saw that, but It was definitely the ISS. And this was taken at Green Lane Park. It's about 400 yards from my house. Subbortle 5 sky. And the last thing I have to show you is a little movie I made of Mars. And I have to thank Rob Lancaster for inspiring me to take this. I had no experience in planetary photography. Mars was coming to opposition. And, I was trying to figure out what to image. And Rob was my butt. He's like, why don't you do this? I'm like, I've never done this before. He's, Lou, you have the perfect telescope for it. Go for it. So he helped me set this up. I don't know if you guys remember, we put all this, I used my PowerMate, we put it together, got everything focused, and this is still done with my DSLR. Now, you can probably why the resolution is not that great. The seeing was not terrible that night, but with the DSLR, I was lucky to get 15 frames per second when I was using it. So, with a dedicated planetary camera, you're going to get 60, 90, or 100 or more. But, so that will help make it sharper. Not to mention that this also, I had to use, I used backyard EOS. And the advantage of having that and the Canon, most Canon cameras is they have a 1:1 pixel ratio when you're zooming at 5x. So you're using the entire sensor. Whereas compared to like Nikon, they use the Sony chips, and I don't know what kind of compression algorithm they use, but it looks like shit. So good luck if you have a Nikon trying to do this. Did we lose everybody? Is it just us?
There's about a dozen of us still, but Lou, I think people are running out of steam. So if you,
Yeah, I know. That's it. That's the end.
Things short here, or
that's the end of my
speed things up. Oh, okay, great. But does anybody have any questions for Lou? Okay. Well, thanks very much, Lou. Interesting stuff. Some nice looking pictures. Thanks to everybody for participating. I know we ran late. We lost Igor, so we're not going to hear from him tonight, I don't think. So unless he's out there and I can't see him on the screen. Igor, are you out there? No. Okay. He's definitely gone for the evening. So.
Thanks for letting us share, Bill. This was a lot of fun.
Sure. All right, well, that's the end of the Astrophoto Showcase.
Cool.
So,
Thank
anything
you
else,
for
Jeff?
all the participants. Again, got a whole lot of information from some gear that the club has to a plug and play basic rig to what you can do with, I guess, no limits. So yeah, thanks to everybody. And again, I think we really look forward to getting back together in person next week for the astronomy workshop. Again, we'll obviously do it hybrid, so we'll continue to have a Zoom session running. And if things continue to look good, we will do a hybrid meeting for March. So again, thanks again to everybody, and we'll see everybody soon.
Yep. Thanks to everybody for coming out.
And again, final reminder that this will be posted on YouTube. So good night.
Good night, guys.
Thank you.